Thank you for attending today's webinar. And today is all about mediation training and whether it's really essential for the modern day managers. So over the course of 30 minutes, we're going to explore what leading thinkers are saying about conflict management, why mediation skills are becoming increasingly important for leaders, and how organisations can build their skills into the workplace. We hope that you'll leave with some practical skills that you can walk away with today and use immediately. So first of all, I can change the slide. Introduce Sarah and I. So, hi, I'm Lizanne Keenan. I am a director of LK Mediation Services. I'm an accredited workplace mediator. My background spans from over 20 years in HR and management. I'm also experienced coaching, team facilitation, and workplace mediation. Oh, just got somebody joined. I'm just going to ask. Hi there, can I just ask you to pop yourself on mute? There we go, we're just going to put you on mute. And what we also do is we train new mediators. So much of my work involves helping organisations to address conflict before it escalates into grievances, sickness absences, and employee resignations. Over to you, Sarah.
Yep. Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah Crayford Brown. So my first career was as a criminal barrister, and that also took me to being a senior leader in the Crown Prosecution Service. So first career, public sector. And it was whilst I was there, I trained as a workplace mediator. And it was that led me to founding my company, Mediation in the Workplace. And my second career as a accredited workplace mediator, trainer and coach. So I've now spent almost 2 decades delivering mediation qualifications, mediating and supporting organisations with complex workplace disputes. I do train mediators, and Lizanne, obviously one of my most able students over the years, and we've now worked together and probably between us on hundreds of mediation and conflict resolution cases across, a wide range of organisations and all 3 sectors. Back to you.
Thanks, Sarah. So just before we get into the meaty subject, we've been running these webinars for a while now. So we just want to talk to you about what is the philosophy behind our webinars. So we understand that conflict is becoming increasingly complex, and many managers are expected to deal with these without having received the proper training. And it's become quite a hot topic now. Everything we share in grounded real life practice are things that we have actually touched ourselves. And the examples and stories and the case studies that we're going to share come from situations we've encountered ourselves. So our webinars are about sharing good practice, supporting the individuals through difficult work, encouraging reflection, helping people make better decisions when relationships become strained. Now, Sarah and I have worked together, as she's mentioned, for quite some time now, and we're the absolute opposite. We're very different. Sarah's very creative in her thinking, and I'm very much a detailed thinker. And one of the participants in the session today has attended one of our training programs, and I'm sure she'll verify how very different we are, but how much we complement one another as well. We do challenge each other, we ask each other difficult questions and bring different perspective into situations. And that difference really comes out, particularly when we are helping resolve teams in conflict as well. So what Sarah and I do, we both mediate individual mediations, and together we also do multi-group mediations. We train new mediators. We train mediation skills for line managers. We do conflict coaching, behavioural profiling, so very similar to DISC or Insights. We do a programme called See Me. And as I've mentioned, everything we do is grounded on practical experience, and we bring that professional career background to everything that we do within organisations. So What are today's leaders thinking? So, for many years, mediation was viewed as a specialist skill, something used only when things have gone really badly wrong for organisations. And what's interesting is leading thinkers are now saying something very different. So Anna Shields, writing in the Forbes, argues that mediation principles are no longer a nice to have, but skills that are essential for leaders in their capabilities of running departments and businesses. She notes that managers are spending over 4 hours a week just dealing with workplace conflict, which is absolutely crazy. Harvard Business Review has repeatedly highlighted that leaders who avoid conflict or rush to impose solutions often damage trust and performance. Instead, the most effective leaders facilitate constructive dialogue. Jane Gunn, Monique Newton, and other conflict specialists are saying similar things, and the common message is clear. Modern leadership is becoming less about directing people and more about helping people navigate disagreements productively. In many ways, managers are increasingly expected to use mediation skills every day. Over to you, Sarah.
Yeah, so I don't know what you think about when you think about the word mediation, but for most people, they imagine a couple of people sitting around a table with a mediator trying to settle a dispute. And yeah, that is mediation. But mediation skills are something different. You can use those and you'll see them in many different ways. So what are we talking about when we talk about mediation skills? There's active listening, key. Asking effective questions, again, a key skill. Being able to remain impartial and manage the emotion that may be present. The ability to summarize back and perhaps reframe a difficult conversation so that you take out the emotion but get to what the real needs are that are being expressed. Very much it's about helping people find their own solutions. And it's also about, it's a bit of a watchword now, but creating psychological safety in these situations. And, when Lizanne and I were thinking about this and the question, are these skills now essential for modern managers? I was thinking about, well, how have things changed? And my dear old mum, God bless her, she's not with me any longer, but she was born in the early 30s, went into the workplace in the 50s. And when I used to talk to her about what I might be doing in a mediation, she just, every time she'd say to me, why don't people just do what they're told? And she really couldn't understand why I could actually have a career and a job doing what I was doing. So that, we moved from that place of people simply being told what to do. I think then, and certainly when I came into the workplace, there was very much this traditional management view that managers were there to solve problems for other people, for their staff. And I think, we do still see a lot of that. And I'm not saying that's gone and managers don't have a role in sorting problems sometimes. But I think today the shift really is on managers having the skills to help people solve problems for themselves. And okay, that may be a little subtle, but the difference is huge. Because if as a manager, you're always solving problems for your staff, you build independency and they're going to keep coming back to you. Whereas if you're enabling your staff to feel confident to solve the problems for themselves, what you build there, of course, is accountability, ownership, and ultimately probably stronger relationships with others. But more importantly, it's freeing up managers' time because they won't be constantly having to solve the problems for others. So here's my question. I know there's not lots of us here, but if you think about, your workplace, either now or ones you've worked in previously, what are the skills that you think modern managers struggle with most? And perhaps we can put that in the chat and see what people think. Right. Anybody need to put one in? Having difficult conversations. Yes, you know, I've put mine ready. And that's exactly what I'm putting in. Yeah. Technical skills, but lack the people skills. Absolutely. Maria, have you got anything to add to us? What would you put in there, Lizanne?
Do you know,
Interesting conversation.
yeah, I think it's the very much the refraining from offering a solution.
Yeah.
They want to shut down the conversation very quickly, offer a solution and move on as quickly as possible, not realizing that actually, yes, they may have closed that conversation down there, but it's only going to spring up a day or two later.
Yeah, absolutely. And somehow there's a fear about if you open it up and let people really talk about what they're wanting and needing, that may cause challenges they can't deal with, when usually it's the opposite, isn't it?
Yeah, very much
Yeah.
so.
Okay.
Right. So why are so many organizations still avoiding investing in these skills? So, despite all the evidence, many organizations are still not on board with this. And the question is why? Because usually conflict remains largely visible, but instead policies are still taking the precedent. Businesses are still addressing it as grievances. And they're still seeing the resignations, they're still seeing the absence rates, but they're not linking it to conflict. What they don't see are the weeks and months of deteriorating relations that have come before that. There also there is a belief that conflict management still sits with HR. The reality, conflict happens in teams every single day. A manager are often the first people employees turn to, but many managers have been promoted because they're technically brilliant, but very few have been promoted because they've got the skills at handling difficult conversations. And the result is that managers are often expected to navigate conflict without that roadmap, without that support. And that's so desperately needed. Sarah's going to share a case study with you.
I am indeed. So I love this bit of the webinar because I get to think back over many years and then pick something out. And so what I want to share with you today is I've worked with a client. They're an ambulance service, so a public sector organisation, and I've worked with them for over 10 years now. And back at the beginning, they were really clear. They wanted to take both a proactive but also a holistic approach to improving how they, one, prevented but also managed conflict. And so we approached this from, a number of different areas. But the first question, and this is the fundamental question that we had to ask and answer, was to understand what was causing the conflict for their particular organisation. And some of the key things that were identified were these. So first of all, they recognised often they got it wrong at the interview stage, and they were appointing the wrong people into jobs. So, and that then down the line would just lead to issues and conflict and, well, as you know, all sorts of challenges. Another area identified was how to have meaningful appraisals and give constructive feedback, so that it didn't then escalate into grievances, etc. And what was behind that? One of the things that was very much behind that was this lack of clarity between what's effective line management and what constitutes bullying behaviours. And this was an organisation where employees would raise grievances alleging bullying. So having some clarity around that was really important to them. Another area, they recognised there was just a lack of skill and a lack of confidence in having those difficult conversations. And it was really interesting working in this area because, bearing in mind they're an ambulance service, they have some very challenging conversations when they're, on site as a paramedic, etc. But they really struggled having those when it came to having them with staff, their own staff and colleagues. Another area, which again was fairly unique to this ambulance service or any ambulance service, but staff often were put under extreme pressure. Sometimes they might have to go to the coroner's court or even criminal court and give evidence. Often they dealt with very traumatic things, and conflict often arose if they felt they didn't have effective support at these particularly challenging times. Then there was the things that perhaps, more common to all organisations, that need to manage conflict properly when it did arise. And also recognising they wanted to upskill their HR personnel, but also other key staff with mediation skills and indeed training. So they knew what was causing the conflict. And the next challenge then was to design and develop a programme that addressed these issues. And that's what we did. So we had quite a long time period over which we were going to deliver this. And we looked at which staff we were going to focus on. And just going back to those initial causes of conflict from that first question, some of the things we worked on were these. So we put a workshop together on values-based interviewing. So really understanding the sort of person they needed for the role and ensuring that their values, for example, did fit with that right from the outset. We did some meaningful appraisals, we used actors, looked at the different sorts of staff that you may be managing, and it's not a one size fits all how they might do that. Brought in a bit of my legal knowledge, really clearly set out what's bullying, what's harassment, what's effective management, and helping people feel that they understood the differences and where the line was. The most common workshop, and the one that was just delivered on repeat, was how to have courageous conversations. Also, again, a fun one for me, preparing for the courtroom. I got to be the coroner and ask difficult questions, but really just helping people really prepare for when they might be in that really challenging situation of giving evidence. And then, more of the core stuff from my perspective, mediation skills for managers, but also, accredited mediation training for some staff. So what actually happened? Well, initially, as you can imagine, people were very sceptical coming in, delivering these workshops, who was I to be doing that, etc. But very quickly it moved. We had waiting lists for many of these workshops, and people would arrive quite excited and saying, I've heard so much about this and I really want to be on it. There was a cultural shift over time as well. You know, as more and more staff went on the programs and the language was adopted and used and shared, it became part of their internal staff language. And I think the real game changer, and if it was one thing I would just encourage above everything else, was the way that this client really targeted new managers. So as someone was promoted, they were developed and put onto a program where they were exposed to these trainings, etc. And I think the difference that made is there was an expectation from the start as to how managers would behave, and they didn't allow bad habits to develop in them. I mean, I'm sure you all know, but once managers have been long established and done things a certain way, it's much harder to change that than if you start with good practices. Back to you, Lizanne.
What a great case study. Thank you, Sarah. We bring it up every time in our webinars about the cost savings if we were to address conflict early. And one of the biggest misconceptions I would say about conflict is that they think that costs start from the moment a grievance is raised. And the reality is it starts a lot earlier than that. ACAS have been estimating, and the figure still hasn't changed, that the cost of conflict for UK employers is around £28.5 billion every year. That's an average of £1,000 per employee. And most of those costs aren't fixated with mediation fees, investigation fees, or legal fees. And that figure has nothing to do with that. It's down to the hours that managers are spending dealing with interpersonal issues and employees avoiding each other, or sickness absence has occurred, or reduced productivity, or talented people leaving the organisation altogether. And I mentioned earlier on in the webinar that line managers are spending around 4 hours of their working week dealing with interpersonal relationship breakdowns. So think about difficult workplace relationships you've witnessed. How much time did your managers spend discussing it? Maybe they've discussed it at home, maybe they've discussed it with the HR department, maybe they've discussed it with their line managers before they've even done anything. And then how many meetings have taken place to try and resolve these problems? How much energy was diverted away from actually doing their day job? So, Sarah, over to you with the next.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think in terms of thinking practically, what can you do about this? I think the good news is obviously you don't need to turn all your managers into fully qualified mediators. You know, you just wouldn't have enough of them to do, I hope. But there are lots of ways to, gently shift the culture so that the mediation skills are really part and parcel of their day job. And if you think back to the case study, I just encourage you to start with asking yourself that first question. What is it that's causing conflict within your organisation? And because you need to know the answer to that before you can think about what's the approach and what might you do to address it. I gave you lots of examples, but is it really about having those difficult conversations? Is it about having some sort of leadership development program that really put those mediation skills in from the outset? You might want internal mediation champions. I was one of those back in the Crown Prosecution Service, just letting people know we do this, we have this is how you can use it. There could be conflict coaching needed for some managers who perhaps have got some really difficult relationships they're trying to manage. building confidence about early intervention. And I think Lizanne already mentioned, but we also do some behavioural preference work. If you think Myers-Briggs or Insights, we use See Me, where you're really helping people to understand, but also celebrate each other's strengths, particularly when they may be different from your own. So, obviously Lizanne and I would love to help. And we're certainly here to help you think through what you might want and what you might need, and to offer some ideas. There's no off-the-shelf solution here. Everything's different and it's always bespoke. So I'm thinking, our question for this webinar was, is mediation training now essential for all modern managers? I mean, our view is a resounding yes. It's certainly one of the biggest challenges facing organisations today. And I'm hoping that the more we talk about it, the more organisations are going to see what they can do to just empower their managers to take this on. So shall I just move on to, so a couple of examples of things we've done previously that we might be able to help you with. Sometimes we work with clients over long periods of time. Recently designed and delivered a collaborative conversation program, for example, over a 4-month period. And then we've, in between, we've given managers time to practice the bit of learning, and then we come back, reflect on that, build on that skill, and do that again. We've also then delivered sort of intensive 2-day mediation programs, but also then internal accredited mediation programs. And really, that all depends on the size of the organisation and where your need is greatest. I think the thing to say is, whatever we're delivering, we do it with some key principles in mind. One, it's always going to be about practical skills. There's always interactive learning taking place, and we bring and use real workplace scenarios to this, and tools that people can just use every day. I mean, for me, success in any form of training or development is if people go away, 1, remembering it, and 2, using it and feeling confident down the line to keep using it because they remembering it and made a difference. So I think that's probably time to start wrapping this up.
Thanks,
Back
Sarah.
to you, Lizanne.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for attending today. If there's one thing that we want to get a message across, is that conflict isn't going away. Workplaces are becoming more complex, more diverse, and more demanding, and the leaders who thrive won't necessarily be the ones that have all the answers. They'll be the ones that create conversation that helps others find the solution. And that's why we believe that mediation skills are rapidly becoming an essential leadership capability, and so are the thought leaders as well. So thank you for spending some time with us today. We're going to stop sharing the presentation and open up to any questions that you